All right, let's dive into this treasure trove about Joe Biden. We've got a ton of info here, pulled straight from his Wikipedia page, and it's a wild ride, let me tell you. Early setbacks, political battles, changing views.
Oh, definitely changing views. That's what stands out to me, how much his early life seems to have shaped his political trajectory.
Yeah, for sure. It's not just like a timeline, right?
Yeah.
It's understanding how those experiences actually influenced his decisions and policies later on. Like, think about his childhood in Scranton.
Oh, absolutely. His family really struggled financially. They even had to move in with his grandparents for a while.
Wow.
So it's no surprise that he became such a strong advocate for working families throughout his entire career.
It's like that struggle really stayed with him. And you can see it all throughout his career, starting with his early days as a senator, fighting for better wages, all the way to pushing for economic relief during the pandemic.
Yeah. It's a good reminder that personal experiences can really have a huge impact on a leader's priorities.
For sure.
Hmm.
But his Wikipedia entry also talks about some early stumbles. Like, he had to repeat a course in law school because of plagiarism,
Oh, right.
a mistake he's openly acknowledged.
Oh.
It shows that even those who reach the highest levels of government, they aren't immune to making mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. But what matters is how he handled it. He owned up to it, learned from it, and moved forward. It shows his resilience, his ability to overcome adversity.
And then there's his political debut, winning a seat on the Newcastle County Council at just 29,
Wow.
followed by that surprise victory in the Senate race that same year.
Talk about hitting the ground running.
Right, becoming one of the youngest senators in U.S. history. It really set the stage for his long and eventful career in Washington.
It did.
But wasn't all smooth sailing. His time on the Senate Judiciary Committee, while marked by significant legislation like the Violence Against Women Act, was also overshadowed by controversy, especially his handling of the Anita Hill hearings during Clarence Thomas's Supreme Court confirmation.
That was a defining moment for sure, and one that's still debated today. It really highlights the complexities of navigating issues like sexual harassment, especially in a setting like a Supreme Court confirmation.
Yeah, it's interesting how Biden's stance on certain issues evolved over time. Like his early support for the Iraq War, which he later came to regret and openly criticized, or his shift on same-sex marriage, going from voting for the Defense of Marriage Act to becoming a vocal advocate for marriage equality.
Right. Those shifts show a willingness to adapt and reassess his positions, which, is both admirable and essential for any leader trying to stay relevant in a constantly changing world.
Absolutely. It shows he wasn't afraid to learn from his experiences. And then, of course, there's the pivotal chapter of his career, serving as vice president under Barack Obama.
That partnership, it was something special. They had this genuine connection, a shared vision for America's future. It wasn't just politics, it was a deep personal connection that translated into effective governance.
And it was during his time as VP that he publicly endorsed same-sex marriage, even before Obama did.
Yeah.
Some say that bold move actually forced Obama's hand and accelerated that shift in public opinion on the issue.
It was a major turning point, not just for LGBTQ plus rights, but also for Biden's own political evolution. He was willing to take a stand, even knowing there could be backlash, and that resonated with a lot of Americans.
Now, fast forward to his 2020 presidential run and eventual victory, he faced those accusations about his son Hunter's business dealings in Ukraine.
Right.
They were investigated, but no evidence of wrongdoing was found. He also had to contend with those unprecedented challenges brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic.
It was a campaign like no other, marked by extraordinary circumstances and a deeply divided nation. But Biden, he managed to project this sense of calm, of competence, promising to build back better after the tumultuous Trump years.
Yeah. And even with the shadow of the January 6th attack on the Capitol looming over his inauguration, he entered office with a very clear agenda: tackling the pandemic, addressing economic inequality, and confronting the climate crisis head-on.
It was a presidency that started under immense pressure, but Biden rose to the challenge with this blend of experience, pragmatism, and this deep-seated belief in America's ability to overcome any obstacle.
His Wikipedia page lists some of his key policy initiatives. The American Rescue Plan, that massive economic stimulus package aimed at helping families and businesses bounce back from the pandemic.
That was a crucial move, provided much-needed relief, and it set the stage for a pretty strong economic recovery. It showed Biden's commitment to using the power of the government to help people in need.
Then there's the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. This was a rare instance of bipartisan cooperation, especially in that hyper-polarized political climate.
That bill had been talked about for years, but it never actually happened until Biden took charge. It really shows his ability to work across the aisle and deliver on those promises of much-needed infrastructure improvements.
And let's not forget the Inflation Reduction Act. This was kind of a climate change bill in disguise, pouring billions of dollars into clean energy investments.
A big win for climate activists, for sure, and a really significant step towards addressing that urgent threat of climate change. It also shows Biden's willingness to fight for what he believes in, even when faced with strong opposition.
So kind of a mix of successes and challenges during that first term. But then the world threw him a curveball with the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Definitely a major geopolitical crisis, and Biden's response was decisive.
Yeah.
He slapped sanctions on Russia, provided military and humanitarian aid to Ukraine, and worked tirelessly to rally international support for their defense.
His handling of the whole situation was generally well received. It really showed his experience in foreign policy and his leadership on the world stage. But it also raised some questions about the possibility of things escalating into a wider conflict with Russia.
Navigating that complex situation, trying to help Ukraine without sparking a direct conflict between the U.S. and Russia, both nuclear powers, required a very careful approach.
Absolutely. And it's a challenge that we're still facing today. Back in the U.S., things weren't without controversy either. That whole classified documents incident, where he mishandled those sensitive materials from his time as vice president, became a political football.
Oh yeah, a definite misstep. And it gave his opponents something to attack him with. While there was no proof of intentional wrongdoing, it raised concerns about his handling of sensitive information and fueled those partisan attacks.
Speaking of which, the House Republicans even launched an impeachment inquiry against him, even though they couldn't find any solid evidence to back up their claims.
It felt politically motivated, an attempt to damage his presidency and score points with their base. Just added to that already tense atmosphere in Washington.
What's interesting is how, despite all these challenges and controversies, Biden managed to oversee a really strong economic recovery from that COVID-19 recession. His Wikipedia page even mentions record job creation and historically low unemployment rates during his term.
It was a significant accomplishment, especially considering how bad that pandemic-induced recession was. It's a testament to the effectiveness of the policies he put in place, like that American Rescue Plan.
But it's also worth noting that this recovery came with a surge in inflation, something we hadn't seen in decades.
Right, rising prices, especially for gas and groceries, caused real hardship for a lot of Americans and became a political vulnerability for Biden.
Yeah. It reminds us that even with the best intentions and well-thought-out policies, there are always unforeseen consequences and unexpected challenges that pop up.
Absolutely. Governing is never easy. It's all about finding that delicate balance between different priorities and interests.
So we've covered a lot here, from his blue-collar roots to his time in the White House, from policy victories to personal setbacks. It's clear that Biden's journey is a fascinating mix of ambition, resilience, and this constant effort to adapt to a world that's always changing.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's still so much to unpack about his political positions, his personality, and the lasting effects of his presidency.
Stay with us because we'll be diving even deeper into all of that in part 2 of this episode, coming up right after this.
So before we dig deeper into Biden's presidency, I think it's worth taking a look at how his political views evolved. Early on, he was often seen as this moderate Democrat willing to work across the aisle.
Yeah, his long time in the Senate probably played a big part in that. Compromise is key in the Senate.
Absolutely. But over time, his stances on a lot of issues shifted, becoming more progressive, especially on social issues like LGBTQ plus rights and climate change.
Like his changing stance on same-sex marriage, he went from voting for the Defense of Marriage Act to being a strong supporter of marriage equality.
Right. It's a pretty remarkable shift. It shows his ability to adapt to changing social values, to rethink his own beliefs. It also highlights how the Democratic Party itself has evolved, becoming more and more supportive of LGBTQ plus rights.
And his focus on climate change during his presidency was a stark contrast to what we saw from his predecessor. He rejoined the Paris Agreement, shut down the Keystone XL pipeline, and really pushed for those ambitious emission reduction targets.
It's interesting how he framed climate change not just as an environmental problem, but as an economic opportunity.
Right.
Saying that investing in clean energy would create jobs and boost the American economy.
Yeah, that practical approach probably helped him gain support for things like the Inflation Reduction Act, which, despite its name, was a big climate change bill. It pumped billions of dollars into clean energy investments and tax credits.
Definitely. A hard-won victory for Biden and proof of his dedication to tackling climate change. It also showed his political skills, his ability to negotiate and compromise to get things done.
Now, beyond the specific policies, I'm curious about how his personality influenced his leadership style. His Wikipedia page mentions his ability to connect with people on a personal level, his empathy.
Oh, that's one of his most defining characteristics. He's known for being a good listener, offering comfort during tough times, and relating to people from all walks of life. It's something that's come up again and again throughout his career, especially after the personal tragedies he's faced.
Yeah, losing his first wife and daughter in that car accident, and then later his son Beau to brain cancer, it obviously had a deep impact on him. He's spoken openly about his own struggles with grief, and I think that resonates with people.
It does. It makes him more human, more relatable, and it seems to have fueled his empathy and his desire to help others who are hurting.
Of course, not everyone's a fan. Some point to his tendency to make gaffes, to slip up verbally.
He's definitely known for those off-the-cuff remarks, and yeah, they've gotten him into trouble sometimes, but his supporters argue that those gaffes are just a sign of his authenticity, his willingness to be himself, even if it means messing up now and then.
And there were those concerns about his age, especially as president. He became the oldest person to hold that office, and questions about his stamina and mental sharpness lingered.
Age was definitely a big factor in the 2024 election. It was a tough campaign, and even his biggest supporters had moments of doubt. His decision to drop out, while unprecedented, seemed to acknowledge the toll that age and the presidency had taken.
It was a selfless move, putting the needs of the country and his party ahead of his own ambitions. And it opened the door for Kamala Harris to become the Democratic nominee, which was a historic moment.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
it was. Even though she didn't beat Trump in the general election, Biden's endorsement and support were undoubtedly important in her journey.
So, thinking back on his life and career, what do you think will be Joe Biden's most lasting impact as president?
It's tough to say for sure, but I think he might be remembered as this transitional figure, a bridge between the Obama era and whatever comes next. He steadied things after a really chaotic period, brought back a sense of normalcy and decency to the White House, and laid the foundation for progress on things like climate change and infrastructure.
Yeah, he showed that it's still possible to lead with compassion and empathy, even in such a divided political landscape.
Exactly. He never lost faith in America's potential for good, and he always tried to bridge those gaps and bring people together. Whether he always succeeded is up for debate, but his commitment to those ideals never wavered.
You know, his Wikipedia page mentions something I find really interesting: his media portrayals. How he's been shown on Saturday Night Live over the years, from Kevin Nealon to Jason Sudeikis to Jim Carrey, reflects how his image has changed in the public eye.
It reminds us that presidents, even those who try to project seriousness and authority, are always going to be subject to pop culture and satire. It's all part of the interesting story of a life lived in the public spotlight.
And with that, we're wrapping up part 2 of our deep dive into the life and career of Joe Biden. We'll be right back with our final thoughts on this complex and influential figure. Welcome back to our final thoughts on Joe Biden. We've covered a lot, from his Scranton childhood to his time on the world stage. As we wrap up, what do you think were his biggest achievements?
It's easy to just focus on specific things he got done, like the American Rescue Plan or the Inflation Reduction Act. But I think his most lasting impact might be something harder to define, like his role in bringing back some sense of normalcy and decency to American politics after all that chaos.
You're talking about after the Trump presidency and all that division.
Exactly. Biden came in facing some huge, unprecedented challenges. A pandemic, a fractured society, a global order in flux. And right from the start, he made it clear he wanted to heal those rifts, bring people together, and restore faith in American democracy.
And he did that partly just by being himself. He didn't hide his emotions. He talked about his own struggles. He really emphasized empathy and compassion.
Right, he brought that human touch back to the White House. He reminded everyone that it's okay to disagree, to have different viewpoints, but we can still find some common ground, work towards shared goals.
Yeah, and he definitely got his share of criticism. But I think history will look back on him favorably for those efforts to bridge the gaps and lead with a steady hand.
I agree. And on top of that, his focus on things like climate change and infrastructure, those might have long-term effects we can't even fully grasp yet.
It's interesting to think about how those decisions from his presidency will keep shaping the future, even as new problems come up and new leaders take over.
Right. It's a reminder that history keeps going, and each chapter is built on the ones that came before. Biden's story is just one part of that bigger story. But it's a big part, with its ups and downs, moments of bravery and compromise.
And that's what makes these deep dives so great. The chance to explore these complex stories to see what shapes people, and in turn shapes our world.
It's all about connecting the dots, seeing the whole picture, and appreciating all the little details of history.
Well said. I want to thank you for joining me on this journey through Joe Biden's life. It's been a fascinating conversation.
Thanks for having me.
And to all our listeners, thank you for sharing your source material and taking this deep dive with us. We hope you keep digging into these topics and form your own opinions about Joe Biden's place in history. Until next time, keep diving deep.